Part 3 of Deuteronomy 28. I left off with the 65th and talking about the lynching and the part right here. And it says, in our 400-year history in the North America, there hasn't been one instant of peace for us, from slavery to Jim Crowism to segregation and lynching to racism and discrimination and so on. There has been a constant trouble and oppression for us. Numerous of sources, including the federal government's Central for Disease Control, CDC, reported that being Hebrew in the United States is hazardous to our health. Being a Hebrew in the U.S. means higher mortality rates, lower levels of education, lower levels of occupational status, lower incomes, lower levels of health, poor housing, fewer two-parent households, higher unemployment, greater contact with the criminal justice system, and higher levels of martial disruption that the general population. The report suggests that the social economic conditions among the Hebrews to be large to the degree to stem and the structured economic social inequalities produced by centuries of slavery, Jim Crowism, and being neglected. Since the Hebrew man is primary target of racism, the report explains in large measures why Hebrew men are disproportionately burdened with the health problems and the shortest life expectancies of any race or gender. The soles of Israel's feet have not rest in over 200 years. We are always on the move, running for our lives. This is how we have arrived into the west coast of Africa from the so-called Middle East. There was 1,400 migrations from the so-called Middle East to the West Africa, starting the first century CE, AD/CE. These Hebrew migrations went on with great frequency from about 300 AD/CE, and they continue with the uttermost regularly for 1,200 years. Here in the United States, the Hebrews are responsible for what is known as the Great Migration. This is what the largest peacetime migration of the people in the human history. Between 1940 and 1970, over 5 million Hebrews left the rural South for what we call the promised land of the urban North, and the greatest migration in United States history. We've left the sharecropper shacks for dubious shelters of the ghetto housing projects. Like you have the gangsters and things like that. They were nice neighborhoods, and then it became ghettos in the future, and fled in one kind of a poverty and oppression, only encounter another just as bleak, because you had all so-called whites in that area. That's how gangs came from. Most of their people came from the South, and then they was poverty stricken. But 50,000 Hebrews moved to Chicago from the South in 18 months during this World War II. This is why I was born in Chicago. Both of my parents and grandparents came from Mississippi during this migration period. To this very day, the Hebrews are still on the move in the search of a better way. This scripture always says that Israel was going to have trembling heart, which is panic, and failing of the eyes and sorrows of mind. This is showing that Israel is going to be sad and grief-stricken and fearful and spiritually blind and plagued by misfortune. Israel and the United States have all these characters described in the verse of scripture. We have been living in a very hostile environment for a long time. Verse 66. and your life hanging in doubt before you. And you shall fear day and night, and shall have none uncertain of your life. Hebrews have been fearing for our lives since the times of slavery, and it is a historical fact that the Hebrew life has never had any value in this country. This is the reason for centuries Israel has been murdered and terrorized, and no one can seem to stop it. Our lives hanged in the balance before us. All the statistics shows that we die from violence in prime of our lives more than any other ethnic group. In the 1990, Hebrews represented 50% of the 23,760 murder victims known to the police. The homicide rate among Hebrew men is generally 6 to 7 times higher than the rate among the Gentile men. The U.S. Department of the Health Department Human Service report in that 1990, Hebrew males had a homicide rate of the 68.7% per 100,000 compared with 8.9% of 100,000 for Gentile males. Homicide is now the leading cause of death for the Hebrew males 16 to 24 years of age, my age bracket again. And 1987, homicide accounted for 14% of all of the death among young Hebrew males 15 to 24 again, and then went down and it's going to the younger age. And Hebrew males in this age group had a homicidal rate 138.3. More than 9 times is this homicide rate of the young Gentile males, 15.4 in a study that in the Bureau of the Justice Statistic estimates that the lifetime risk of death by homicide is greater for the Hebrews, 1 in 21 for the Hebrew males, and 1 in 104 for the Hebrew males. Then and it's for Gentile or whites, so-called white people, and in 103 and for the Gentile males, and 1 in 369 for Gentile females. The number of the Hebrew females murdered between 1980 and 1985 exceeded numbers of casualties, 9,500 in the Vietnam War in 1967 for the U.S. One of the peak years of fighting, 44,428 Hebrew males were murdered between 1980 and 1985, nearly equal to the total of the Americans killed during the entire Vietnam conflict. Hebrew men have the shortest life expectancy of any male in the United States, except for a small group of Sioux Indians. Wow, we about to be extinct, man. Negroes. With statistics like these, it is no wonder why many Hebrews are very afraid to come out of their homes in the day or night, because we have a little assurance that we will make it back alive. This is why in the Hebrew communities across the country there are children 9 to 10, 11, and 12 years old planning for their own funeral. These children have been seeing so much death and destruction until they have lost all hope that any change will come. In a study done in 1996 of children in war-torn countries and Hebrew children in the United States, it was found that the children in the war-torn countries are better off mentally than the Hebrew children in the U.S. and the children in the war-torn countries knew only the day the war, death, and destruction in their continue would end. But the Hebrew children don't see an end to the death and destruction that they witness daily. To succeed, the rate for the Hebrews have more than doubled from 33.6% per 100%, 8.1, and per 1,000 suicide. It's the third leading cause of death for the Hebrew men. The Hebrews are so unsure about their lives that now we have to begun to kill ourselves in the United States. In the United States, simple traffic police and mean death for the Hebrew between 1976 and 1987. I was born in that particular time period. We'll start off then. The most recent period study, some 1,800 Hebrews were killed by law enforcement bullets. Hebrews are still 3 times more likely to die from a police bullet than Gentiles. Hebrews are more likely than Gentiles to be killed in error. In many causes, no weapons is found on the suspect's body. Even today, unarmed Hebrew men and women are being gunned down almost daily by law enforcement officers. We have no assurance of our lives. We live in constant fear. All of this is not happening to us by coincidence. This is the fulfillment of long-awaited forgotten prophecy. This is the reason that a white person can walk down a Hebrew street in a Hebrew neighborhood, and the majority of the time, no one will touch them. I see Mormon ministries all the time in our neighborhoods, riding bikes. They come in peace and live in peace. But a Hebrew man and a woman or a child can come down the same street, is much more likely to be harmed in some way. The curses are on us. That's why we have all this violence in our communities. If a racist police hate groups or others don't get us, our own people will. And here's the 68th verse, the masterpiece of everybody that's preaching around YouTube. It says, "And Yah shall bring you into Egypt again with ships by the way of whereof I spoke on you, Lapis I spake unto you. You shall see it no more again, and there you shall be sold unto your enemies." And that's a fulfillment in we was in Greece, and the sinners of Esau had us on chopping boards, especially here today. In the past, bondmen and bondwomen, slaves, and no man shall buy you, or no man shall save you. But in this verse, Egypt is a synonymous with the oppression, slavery, captivity, and affliction. In the scripture, Egypt is referred to as the house of bondage. You can look in Exodus 13 and 3 and 14, and the 20th chapter and the 4th verse in Exodus, and Deuteronomy 5 and 6 and 7 in chapter 7 verses 8, 26 26th chapter in Deuteronomy and 6, and iron furnace is Deuteronomy 4 and 20. The furnace of affliction, Isaiah or Yeshua 48 and 10. Egypt was the symbol of the hard several bondage to the Hebrews. Exodus 1, chapter 1, Exodus 1 and 13th verse to the 14th verse. What this verse is saying is that the Israel will go into Egypt like the oppressive, powerful, severe bondage, slavery, captivity in ships. This is exactly how we got into this country, hemisphere. We were taken captive from the west coast of Africa, brought to the Americas into the bottom of slave ships. Once we arrived in the West, we were placed on auction blocks and sold as cattle to the highest bidder. They did that when we was in Greece. We was sold to Egypt at the time when Egypt was being conquered by the Grecians. That's a fulfillment of prophecy. They did that, and the sins of Esau sold them again. And they did us again over here this side of the world. They took the 3 head tribes on this side of the world. The same prophecy repeated itself again. So that's what they did. I learned that from an elder, and he mentioned that. This happened for us over 300 years. This is a historical fact that can't be denied. Just check your American history books. As I've already mentioned earlier, those people that brought us into this country in slave ships, subject us to the worst form of slavery and oppression, were indeed our enemies. And these were the people who were the buyers. And at those auctions, we are sold as slaves. Our enemies, just as scriptures says, our enemies, just as Scripture says. No other racial or ethnic group in the Western Hemisphere can claim this has happened to them. Only we were brought into an oppressive bondage in ships, so onto our enemies. This prophecy was only fulfilled with the advent of the transatlantic slave trade. There isn't one instant in the Scripture where the ancient Israel were back in Egypt, were back into Egypt in ships. They will walk into Egypt dry land. Genesis 46 and 5 and 6. During the biblical times, the land of Israel and Egypt was one continual landmass. So there were no needs to go into the Egypt in ships. So when where was the prophecy fulfilled? Answered during this transatlantic slave trade, when no less than 1 million of our people were brought here as slaves. When the Scripture says no man will buy them, it says that no man will buy or redeem us out of our condition, because this same Scripture says we were to be sold unto our enemies, and you can't sell nothing. You can't sell nothing if there was no buyer. Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, and Bill Cosby, money combined could not buy us out of our condition. You tell me, does the Jews or anybody else fit the description of Israel in the latter days? We fit the description down to a T. Many if not the majority of the Bible reading the people have never heard of, understood these curses, especially the so-called African Americans. We have been told to our misfortune this misfortune have become upon us because we are inferior people, and became as many of our people has become shameful of our history. But as prophecy said, in the last days knowledge shall increase. Daniel 12 and 4. In the time of the end, we are at the time of the end. Now, with the right understanding of the Bible prophecy, biblical prophecy, with the right understanding of our history, we have begun to set the record straight and show the world, especially our people, that we are not or have not suffered for nothing. We are not a cursed people in the way that slave masters taught the slave. He lied and said we were cursed with black skin. We are not cursed or being punished because we are hated or genetic inferior. We are under the curses of the Father because we have a special calling and a special relationship to the Most High, and a relationship which no other people on earth has ever experienced. Amos 3 and 1 and 2. One is which we have long forgotten about. We will raise up and be the people we are destined to be. This fact the whole world will bear witness to in the very near future. Now allow me to further provide more proof and prophecy about the true Hebrews of the Bible, known as the Israelites. Deuteronomy 28, chapter 28. And so this is the part 3 of chapter 28. So may Yahuwah bless you. Hope you get the understanding. Many times, all I want to say is shalom.